Hello Europa Universalis players, my name's Riemann, and today I want to show you the time-lapse for my 3 Mountains run. As this is playing, I'm going to use this as a chance to answer some of the questions people posted. The first question comes from Alex Moldavanu, who asks, at the start of the game, assuming an event gives you money, at what point should you decide to hire an advisor? He also asks, how deep do you find it fun to go with analysis for your strategies, just wanting to make sure you're finding it fun enough to keep at it. For the first question, over running many test games, I found that money was pretty critical to being able to constantly maintaining colonies later on, and that some good events early could be negated by bad events later. Because of this, stockpiling ducats instead of buying an advisor appeared to be the better choice. The small edge you could get in monarch points was tiny, while being forced to reduce colonial maintenance was catastrophic. For the second question, I rarely do the super deep analyses that I've seen some people do, simply because I don't find them that useful all that often. Rather, I like making general rules of thumb to follow and apply them to broad situations. However, I had a lot of fun trying to maximize value for this very specific scenario of Ryukyu's opener, so I might try it again in different circumstances. And don't worry, I have a lot of fun talking about EU4 like this, so I'll definitely continue as long as I have time to. Invalid Index asks, wouldn't it be better to sell galleys at the start of the game? Also, isn't privateering better than protecting trade? So for the selling galleys, I think over a half dozen people asked me this exact question, and the answer is yes, it would have been better. I just completely forgot that you could sell ships since I never used that feature. Also for privateering, I was having problems with Ming sending ships against me sometimes, so I just decided that protecting trade was good enough. But yeah, if you're willing to keep checking to see that they haven't sent pirate hunters, then you can make a tiny bit more cash that way. The Mining HQ asks, how do you deal with separatists at the beginning of the game with a small economy and small army that's spread across the ocean? So rebels can be a big problem early on simply because you don't have a lot of resources to work with. You must use whatever you have to maximum efficiency, because the rebel stacks can spawn as large as your force limit. In my case, for the Maldives, I just raised autonomy because it was a poor province and I didn't want to deal with it. For East Africa, I positioned my troops on the province that revolted to get the defensive bonus and won it that way. Saibon asks, I have all these expansions. How dependent are the strategies on the DLCs I don't own? So I get DLC related questions a lot, and I'm kind of at a disadvantage here because I've always bought the DLCs day one. A lot of times I don't even know what's a paid feature and what's included in the free patches. But for what it's worth, I checked through the expansion list and here's how necessary I think they are, listed by descending importance. Art of War is critical because client states and transfer occupation are essential to late game territory management. Also, being able to cancel exploration ideas after everything is colonized is really nice. Next, common sense is also critical for Ryukyu to just be able to develop the Renaissance. It also has constitutional monarchies, which was the ideal endgame government for me in 1.19 for the reduced annexation cost. Beyond this, Rights of Man is also extremely useful to be able to disinherit and not get stuck with regencies where you can't declare war. Prestige farming loses a lot of its luster if you can't convert it into monarch points. Beyond these 3, I'd say that the others are just nice to have. The Cossacks is nice to milk monarch points, Mare Nostrum is nice for the map stealing and siege ability, and El Dorado is nice for the bonus merchants. Video Kirby asks, you mentioned it's better to gobble up small nations early, but how do you go forward when a large nation is breathing down your neck? Every game has a few AI superblobs, and in a world conquest it's important you know how to deal with them. Don't try to take them out too early if it's too costly. What you should do is get a strong ally to deter them from attacking you, then go about your business picking on the little guy until you massively outnumber them. That's why, in my game, I save the monstrous Commonwealth until the very end. Darth Choker asks, when developing, isn't it better to give the province to the Merchants Guilds first rather than switching the capital straight away? Also, wouldn't it be better to develop in Brunei so you can get global trade later? For the first question, no. The dev cost reduction from the merchants is a national modifier, not a province modifier, so you don't need to give them the province. Also, making it the capital is necessary for the colonialism institution to spawn, and it does give a tiny dev cost reduction, so there's no reason not to do it right away. His second question is similar to a question from Jonas, who asks, is it worth it to be the origin of global trade? So if you watched my analysis of institutions video, you'd see that it's really only the first 3 institutions that non-Europeans have trouble with. That's why I was willing to go far out of my way to get the Renaissance, colonialism, and the printing press. I did watch some of Arumba's 3 Mountains videos, and they inspired me to look at the files for global trade, and I found that it's a lot like colonialism for how reliably you can get it to spawn. However, the impact if you do get it isn't nearly as big as for the first 3, simply because it generates everywhere in the world so quickly. In fact, it's the quickest spreading institution of any of them by a long ways. The 300 monarch points you get for being the origin would be nice, but they weren't something I was going to go too far out of my way to get. Jonas also asks about paying tribute to the Ming, which is similar to a question from Skelumph, who asks, do you think a world conquest will be easier with the Mandate of Heaven? Definitely. I'll eventually get around to posting a video about my broader thoughts on this topic. It might be slightly harder in the beginning because of tribute, but the reason why it's overall much easier can be summed up in one word: absolutism. Cro-Magnon asks, how come you didn't expand into the Americas early-ish in the game? So I didn't want to waste my colonists getting colonies in Colonial Nations because I want the free cores that come from other colonies in the old world. I could have conquered parts of Mexico, but I'd have to core 5 provinces and my rate of return wouldn't be that great. I could have gotten nice war reps because Native Americans are like golden piñatas, but a lot of the money from the New World comes from trade, and I couldn't control any of the trade nodes necessary to make it super worthwhile. Plus, it was out of my way and I really wanted to focus on the Coptic holy centers instead. Zumi and this guy ask, what's the best nation for a first world conquest attempt? For the longest time, it was the Ottomans. They're still probably number 2 given their great position and resources they have to work with, even though they got a core cost nerf in 1.20. Now though, the easiest nation would probably be Ming-Yuan, where you form Yuan as the Ming. I'll have to do a nation spotlight on that. On that same topic, Quint Buies asks, is a Ryukyu world conquest possible before you've done any other world conquest? So obviously it is, but I really wouldn't recommend it. The best way to get good at world conquests is to just try doing world conquests. There's a lot of things, especially on pacing, that you can only really learn by jumping in and giving it a go, and I worry that if you try with Ryukyu first, you'll get frustrated by things you shouldn't be. World conquest runs are fundamentally different from casual runs in a few big ways and a few subtle ways that are hard to fully appreciate when you haven't tried it before. GG Out asks, how many hours should you have before trying a world conquest? People like to compare how many hours they have in EU4 because it's a really engrossing game, so the hours counter typically grows to obscene heights. However, it's not the greatest indicator of how good you are at the game. If you've been doing really hard runs like with Cyprus or Granada or others, then you start to understand how to really milk everything you can out of a country. You'll also want to fully understand how all the mechanics work, like having a good grip of trade, knowing how to truce juggle, being able to use loans and mercs effectively, etc. So you could have only a few hundred hours of time, but if you know everything and have experience in harder situations, then you could be ready. Whereas you could have thousands of hours of leisurely games where you've never really pushed yourself and you might not be ready. But really, at some point, you just have to give it a try. I think a good intermediate goal would be the Mare Nostrum achievement, and after you get it, play all the way to 1821 trying to conquer as much as you can. You'll probably be surprised by how much clay you can get in those last few years. Chat Agent Bauer says, the only problem is that a world conquest seems so boring. This isn't a question, but he still brings up a good point. World conquests aren't actually that hard when you know what you're doing. However, they're mentally taxing because you constantly have to deal with rebels, micromanage things, and make sure you're on the right path. In casual games, I can run through a late game year in under a minute, but in a world conquest, a late game year could take me 10 to 20 minutes. This, more than any other difficulty spike, is what separates world conquests from other runs. Armendi Ibrahimi asks, would strategies differ if you're going for a normal world conquest versus a one tag? So as I explained in my third video, a normal world conquest has a lot more latitude in keeping subjects around. I'm not a huge expert in normal world conquests because I don't do them a lot, but one thing I'm sure is important is that personal unions don't get liberty desire from development. Hence, you can feed them pretty much an infinite amount of land and keep them loyal. Overall, it's quite a bit easier if you're not going for a one tag because you don't have to annex everybody, so the point math is quite a bit more lax. Duger asks, when is it worth it to lose stability with things like no CB wars? And when do you get back to positive or zero stability? There's only 2 reasons I would voluntarily lose stability, which are no CB wars and truce breaking. No CB wars only happen early in the game, and I only do them if they're an integral part of my strategy. Losing 2 stab hurts, but admin points are plentiful in the early game, so it's easier to get back up to where I need to be. I never try to be in negative stab if I can help it, because the hit to unrest, legitimacy, and interest are pretty bad. Later in the game, admin points are more precious, but if I have a glut of them and want to finish quickly, then truce breaks can be worth it. Fassl asks, what religion do you think is better, Coptic or Hindu? For my run, it was definitely Coptic. Make no mistake though, Hindu is really good. The 10% core cost reduction and events that raise the admin skill of your monarch are amazing. However, it pretty much stops there because you can only get one holy site for one extra missionary. Coptic is harder to get, but it has the same CCR, same tolerance to the true faith, and it has 4 holy sites to give you +2 yearly prestige and 4 missionaries, meaning you can convert a whole bunch of stuff and be able to take tons of overextension late in the game. It also comes with more manpower, missionary strength, and discipline, all of which are nice to have. Beyond this, it has the Defender of the Faith, which has more bonuses, including a notable reduction to War Exhaustion, and I never had to actually fulfill my duty to protect Coptic nations because there's very few of them, and I basically killed them all in the first few years. On top of all of this, they can also form unions with Christian countries. I wasn't super lucky, but I did get Spain for free, which was convenient. So at this point the time-lapse is finished, and I want to show off the religion screen again so you can see just how powerful 7 or 8 missionaries are. Now there are a whole bunch more questions I wanted to answer, so for the rest of the time I'm just going to play some leftover footage I have from the 3rd video. Armendi Ibrahimi asks another question. What do you think of Aruba's 3 Mountains religious strategy, and what other religions do you suggest for 1 tag? From what I've gathered in Arumba's videos, and what he's posted in some comments like this one, he went for Sunni to get the Dhimmi estate, which gives tolerance of heathens, and a whole bunch of tech cost reductions to boot. I like Coptic for my run because of all the prestige, conversions, and CCR it gives, but the best religion can change based on your playstyle. And for what it's worth, Sunni is very viable for World Conquest, and I even think it got better in 1.20. I think the best religions for World Conquest right now are Coptic, Sunni, Hindu, Confucian, Mayan, and Catholic. Each one of them does their own thing, which makes some more suited to certain countries. Andrew Kanata asks, you pick up religious ideas, but in 1.20 they moved Deus Vult to the end of the group. Would you still pick it up? Maybe. I'm less enthused about religious ideas than I am about humanist now, but they're still really good. Moving the Casus Belli to the end of the group is somewhere between a minor and a moderate nerf, but they get amazing synergy with age abilities in the Age of Reformation, and all the Diplo points you can save is still very useful. Overall though, I'd probably run humanist unless I'm doing something special. Ilanapo asks several questions. First, how do you make the Ming explode? In 1.19 it was random, and in 1.20 and 1.21 it's actually probably better to leave them alive with a decaying mandate than to have them disintegrate. Next, how do you annex vassals faster? You do by getting more Diplo rep, with common methods being using Diplo and influence ideas, the advisor, and ivory, although the speed at which you annex usually isn't a big problem. Next, when do you need to hurry? Well, you should steadily be speeding up as the game progresses. For a rough speedometer, you can use administrative efficiency, i.e. when you have more, you should conquer faster. You'll want to be firing on all cylinders after 1745 because that's the year you get the last admin efficiency from technology. Ilanapo's other 2 questions, how do you stack wipe and easy methods for winning wars, are topics I'll cover in a series of military tutorials. Cyrano also asks several questions. First, regarding Colonial Nations, when you annex their overlord they become yours? Yes, but you have to be sure you're full annexing them. A lot of times they have random Pacific islands or have started new colonies. You want the peace screen to say, we demand their full annexation, and if you can get that, you get the colonies they control. Next, how many no-CB wars in this run? I'm pretty sure it was just the ones against the Maldives and Medri Bahri. There's no reason to do it against any others when you can get a CB. Next, what's the correct stability level? I don't like to be negative, so I'll raise it to 0 or +1, then it can drift upwards through events. Next, what's the best government type? In 1.19 it was the constitutional monarchy from its parliament bonuses, but in 1.20 and 1.21 it's probably enlightened despotism for the max absolutism. Next, do you statify everything you can? This question was similar to one by Zerots. In the early game, yes, because I need all the resources I can get. In the late game, I only statify provinces I've annexed from vassals because they're free cores. I also switch around which states I have based on their development because with the free cores you have no reason not to. Hence, a valid strategy is to make vassals in their richer states like Lombardy so you can switch out some of the poorer states for the richer ones upon annexation. Next, for the Diplo annex policy, do you leave it on all the time? I did, but you absolutely don't have to. That's one of the areas I was definitely inefficient on, and I didn't do it basically because I just got lazy when I realized I was well on schedule. J1 Mike asks, how would you stop neighboring nations from getting your institutions if you're not isolated, for example, Korea? I covered this a bit in my analysis of institutions video. You can do some things like scorching the earth on your border provinces, but for the most part you can't stop it. You have to take that sort of thing into consideration as part of your strategy. Ma2812 asks, how did you stay at 100 prestige and 100 power projection? The prestige part I explained in my videos. I stacked every prestige modifier I could get my hands on, and in 1.19 the remove rival piece option gave a whopping 10 prestige. For power projection, it was high because I took a bunch of provinces from the Ottoman Empire without help from allies, so the power projection didn't get split between several countries. With that, I got to the max projection of plus 100 from taken provinces in just one war, and that lasted me a long time since it only decays at -1 a year. Hugin Menin says, there's a plutocratic policy that reduces annexation costs too. There absolutely is, and I would definitely have taken it, but the problem is you have to be a republic to get plutocratic ideas, which leads me to Bada Simofu, who asks, what are your thoughts on Christian monarchies versus republics in the newer patches? Ever since Disinheriting got put in, republics have been struggling. I made the Milan Spotlight to try and showcase that republics still had a niche in 1.19, but with absolutism, the fact that republics reduce maximum absolutism means any latent viability they had has been squashed. No serious blobber would be one now. The fact that they also miss out on PU possibilities is just another nail in the coffin. UGA and Arain ask about corruption, how to deal with it from unbalanced research, and if the unrest reduction it gives has any utility. So unbalanced research from leaving Diplo at 23 does come with a cost, and I feel the best way to deal with it is to just set your corruption slider to the max. I always have enough money to do this when I get to that point, so it's not a huge issue. On the unrest reduction it gives, it's an interesting idea, but corruption takes so long to get down and I really don't want to pay extra monarch points for coring. The better way to get rid of excessive unrest is to flog off uncored provinces to client states to let them deal with overextension. Maya Knife asks, how do you deal with client states that eat up your Diplo points? Do you prioritize extra Diplo relations slots? Well, I definitely try to never go over the relations limit, and you really don't have to. Having 6 slots is enough to have some being annexed and some in the process of coring. Juggling that is a little bit harder early in the game when you only have 4 slots, but it's a skill you can improve like any other. SHM fan asks, what's the maximum development you let client states and vassals have for when you want to integrate them later? As I said, the speed of integration isn't usually an issue. The bigger issue is if their liberty desire goes over 50, because that stops annexation. However, I had tons of prestige, so I could constantly afford to be placating rulers to drop that down. For example, Ming was my vassal and they had an absolutely massive development at over 1,000 by the time I annexed them. It's really whatever you can afford to give them so they don't turn rebellious. That's less for vassals, more for client states, and practically infinite for personal unions. The Web Wizard asks, how do you deal with war exhaustion in vassals? So this can become a big issue in some cases. You're going to be at war a lot, and usually you'll take a bonus that reduces war exhaustion, but your vassals don't get that. They're also really bad at prioritizing buying down war exhaustion with Diplo points. If you're efficient at annexing them, then the issue oftentimes isn't too terrible, but you do need to babysit them and kill the rebels and make sure the enemy doesn't just siege down a ton of their land. If the issue becomes really bad, you should definitely just turn on Scutage, which solves the problem pretty definitively. The Pedro the asks, should I move my capital later in the game? Yeah, it can sometimes be useful. There are 3 main benefits. First, it can let you set up trade companies. Next, it lets you put client states where you want them. And third, it can give you the chance to go revolutionary, which leads to the next question. Gold Knowledge, ZX Tear, and Leaner Smile ask, is it worth it to go revolutionary? I'm going to have to do a video on the revolution target at some point because it's a somewhat obscure and very silly little mechanic that totally doesn't work the way it's supposed to, but is fun nonetheless. But to answer the question, yes, going revolutionary gives tons of benefits at the cost of some monarch points. One of the biggest bonuses it gives is the Casus Belli, which lets you take more land. So if you're not conquering things fast enough, then this can absolutely be a strat you can use. Greenforce asks, have you ever played Victoria 2? Absolutely I have, and I'd like to make videos about all Paradox games. I even had a review type video for CK2's Monks and Mystics expansion pretty much ready to go that I just ended up scrapping. I enjoy all of Paradox's grand strategy titles, but there's so much to analyze that I can't keep up. Conrad Kruk asks, what's your favorite national flag in EU4? This is actually the question I had to think about the hardest. In the end, I couldn't come up with one answer and instead have a top 3. First is the Roman Empire because it just looks really majestic, and second because I'm a huge fanboy of anything related to Rome. Next is the Golden Horde, which I think balances elegance and power quite nicely. It also has a special place in my heart as being the flag of the nation I first took to World Conquest all the way back in EU4. Finally, I'm a big fan of the Timurids because I really like the red on black theme. Again, this has more prominence coming from my EU3 days because the Timurids in that game were an absolute monster for the first 50 years. They struck abject terror in all their neighbors from India to the Ottomans, and there's truly nothing more horrifying than seeing Tamerlane himself at the head of a massive Timurid doomstack that was coming straight for your lands. That's all the questions I have for today. I picked these questions based on what I had interesting answers to, and if I hadn't already explained them before, so sorry if I didn't get to yours. If you do have a question you still want answered, feel free to post it in the comments below. I try to respond to the comments as much as possible, especially for videos I've posted in the last few days. My name's Riemann, and until next time, thanks for watching.